Thank you all for coming. What an honor to be here at the University of Cambridge. I live in San Francisco, but I spend probably a week a month in the other Cambridge in Massachusetts, mostly with MIT. And here I am with you at the fountainhead, the progenitor of Cambridge in the United States, the home of Newton and Darwin and Francis and Crick, and it's really an honor to be here with you. Thank you for having me. And Richard and Chris, thank you in particular for your invitation. How many people here either have started, aspire to start, or someone close to them has started their own business? Raise your hand. Okay, virtually all of us. I think then you're going to find this session timely and relevant. To start us out, I'd like to take you back to the year of my life where I learned the most about entrepreneurship, business, and life. And that was 2000 and 2001, the dot-com bust. Now let me just set the stage a little bit. I live and have spent the last 35 years of my life and career in Silicon Valley in Northern California, hugely exciting place full of familiar names like these: Facebook, Microsoft, Intel, Adobe, Google, Oracle, and so forth. And amongst all these giants was a tiny company that I started called Customer Sat, which is in enterprise feedback management. I started the company in 1997, and just to give you some context, the internet first became productized and commercially available in the 1990s. And billions of dollars was invested throughout the 1990s, which led to so many of the first internet companies that we know today. A huge investment and overinvestment, which collapsed in 2000 and 2001. And during that time, thousands of dot-com startups started going out of business. Well, I started Customer Sat in '97, and for the first 3 years of our life, we enjoyed healthy growth. But in the first quarter of 2001, I would often wake up in sweat-soaked sheets sticking to my skin. Our second round of financing, our Series B round, refused to close despite flurries of meetings with investors as we ran out of cash. Those nights, I would get up, shower off the sweat, and try to get back to sleep. When my management team and I finally realized that our Series B round was not going to close, we huddled to figure out what to do. First, we cut our own salaries, and a few weeks later, those of all of our employees by 10%. I cut my own salary and that of my CFO by 50%. Agonizing and debating over every individual, we laid off 30% of our workforce. 30% of the company that I had spent the last 3 years of my life building. When I assembled our remaining employees to explain to them that this was the only way we could stay afloat and stay together, I felt my composure collapsing and I broke down sobbing in front of our employees. They stood there stunned, sympathetic, and embarrassed that their CEO was crying in front of them. To help us get through, one of our investors lent us $300,000 to me, but for the company, but not directly to the company, but for me to pass through to the company, meaning that I would be personally liable for repaying the loan. Later, I would repay that investor, to whom, despite the arrangement, I was deeply grateful, by mortgaging my townhouse in Menlo Park. The second quarter of 2001, our revenues fell again. This time I reduced my salary to minimum wage, the legal limit. To help us make payroll, we factored receivables. That is, we sold our future receivables at a 20% discount for cash today so that we had enough money to make payroll. To save on rent, we consolidated in the less attractive second floor of our building and rented out the more attractive ground floor to another startup. That startup quit paying us rent after 30 days, came in late one weekend night, cleared out all their belongings, and disappeared without a trace. The nightmare would not end. Finally, we could see profitability ahead in the third quarter of 2001. And then, as you know, on September 11th, terrorists attacked the World Trade Center. The entire Northeast U.S. communications grid was down. It took an entire day just to confirm that all of our employees were still alive. Finally, the next day I was able to send out an announcement, all customer sat employees are safe. Even though we were 3,000 miles away on the west coast of the United States, even there, every company I know had clients or customers who lost family members or employees in the terrorist attacks. One of our clients was Akamai Technologies. They lost their brilliant co-founder, Danny Lewin, on American Airlines Flight 11. If the dot-com bust of 2000 and 2001 did not kill a company, almost certainly the terrorist attacks of September 11th did. Well, we did not make a profit in that first quarter, in that third quarter of 2001. We did break even in the fourth quarter. We didn't hire a single new employee for 18 months. And the going kept tough for the next 2 or 3 years. But we made it through. And the company grew steadily from 2002 until 2007, when it was acquired in the first quarter of 2008. Often I've wondered, why did customer sat survive when so many other companies failed? And that question is what led me to write this book, Unleash Your Inner Company. There's a copy of it being handed around, which you can take a look at. I see it over here. The book has a lot in it I think you'll find is fresh. First of all, the ideal company for you to start is absolutely unique to you. No one else has your combination of skills, knowledge of technologies, assets, passions. And so the right company for you to start is absolutely unique to you and has to be discovered by you. 2, you have many more advantages to start a company and make it a success than you realize. And the book helps you see all of the advantages that you have. 3, positive feedback loops pervade many aspects of life and entrepreneurship. What do I mean by positive feedback loops? I mean people and things that reinforce each other. I'll say more about that in just a moment. But a key part of success is finding, nurturing, and riding these positive feedback loops. A positive mindset is key to success, so I'll say a great deal about the entrepreneurial mindset. And finally, any company can be evolved and scaled into a large company if you want to. And so I talk quite a bit in the book about scalability, and I'll say a few words about that tonight. So those are some of the ideas in the book. So why did customer sat survive when so many other companies failed? I absolutely do not think we were smarter than other management teams. We absolutely did not have more in the way of resources than other management teams did. We only raised $2.94 million in the entire life of the company. Webvan, one of our clients, raised $75 million before an IPO in which they raised several $100 million, and then famously declared bankruptcy 14 months after their IPO. So we certainly didn't have more in the way of resources. If I had to narrow it down to just two factors, I would say it was these. One, we cared more deeply about our business than other management teams did, about all aspects of it, about the coolness of our products, about the satisfaction of our customers, and about each other, more so than other management teams did. And two, we stuck with it longer than other management teams did. As I mentioned, it was another 7 years before the company was acquired in the first quarter of 2008. Many other startups just threw in the towel and gave up before then. So in summary, it was this combination of passion and perseverance that got us through. The very same passion and perseverance that you can muster for your startup. We hear a great deal about passion these days. Every business book today talks about passion. That's kind of old hat now. A few business books also talk about the importance of perseverance. That's more interesting. And no one is talking about how the two reinforce each other, how they form a positive feedback loop. Passion is an attitude, perseverance is a behavior. And in many aspects of our lives, our attitudes and behaviors reinforce each other. If you just stick with something long enough until you start to get good at it and then start to like it and then start to love it, that's an example of perseverance driving passion. Conversely, you know how if you already love an activity that you're deeply engaged with, the hours can go by like minutes. That's an example of passion driving perseverance. And so you can see how the two reinforce each other and form a positive feedback loop. And if you can think of any aspect of your life where you have experienced that positive feedback between passion and perseverance, that is probably a really good area to consider starting a business. So I think of passion and perseverance as similar, broadly, to the north-south and east-west axes if you're trying to climb this mountain. If you only can go along one of those axes, it's going to be hard, maybe impossible, to find a route all the way to the top. But if you have the flexibility to go along either axis, then you can find a route that will take you all the way to the top. Well, that's broadly the same way that passion and perseverance keep you going. Now within, every so often I'll hear it something like, well, what if my passions don't seem very businesslike? What if they're long, hot baths, kittens, and comic books? Well, even in these areas, there are an infinite number of unsatisfied customer needs. Long, hot baths. People like to read, listen to music, talk on the phone when they're in the tub. How about a floating waterproof case for my iPad or iPhone so I can do those things while I'm in the tub? Kittens. Kittens lose a lot of their cuddliness when they grow up to be cats, don't they? How about a diet or a genetic therapy that would keep a kitten its entire life? There'd be a lot of demand for that, wouldn't there be? Comic books. The hugely successful trade show Comic-Con in San Diego, California, and now in other cities around the world, each year attracts 150,000 people. People dress up as their favorite comic book characters, hugely profitable. So no matter what your passion is, there will be opportunities there. You just have to find those unsatisfied customer needs. So I like to say that within areas that you're passionate about or have experienced the positive feedback between passion and perseverance, there are only two things you need to start a company and make it a success: a real unsatisfied customer need and an advantage for satisfying that need. Now, there are tons of real unsatisfied customer needs, even just in the areas you're passionate about. And as you'll see, you have tons of advantages, whether or not you recognize it. But the two are like puzzle pieces, and they have to fit together. And so the challenge is largely one of search to find the two pieces that fit each other the best. That's where you're most likely to be successful. And so those are the first two of a 10-step process that the book takes you through. Step number one is, what are your areas of passion and perseverance? And incidentally, if you're not passionate about anything, as some young people tell me they're not, the book has exercises to help you become passionate about something, starting with things you're just interested in. Mind you, it may take perseverance to develop that passion, but anyone can become passionate about something. So, and the second step is, what are unsatisfied customer needs in areas that you're passionate about? And then we come to the advantages, and then the 10th step is scaling up the uniquely differentiated business you've created. So we start by finding lots of customer needs. And they're out there. The book shows you techniques, and I'll share a technique for finding them. We test them to make sure they're real and unsatisfied, and the subset of all of the ones that we find that are both real and unsatisfied are the ones that we're looking for. Then we turn to the other puzzle pieces, your advantages. Your advantages are a subset of all of your resources. A subset of those are the ones that are applicable to a particular customer need, and a further subset of those are those advantages for that customer need. So what we're looking for are the two puzzle pieces that fit together the best. And again, that's where you're most likely to be successful. And the book shows you how to sort these opportunities and advantages from strongest to weakest fit, to cut the weakest fits off the top, to strengthen the top best fits, and then finally narrow it down to just one best fit. And that's the company that you launch and scale up. And in fact, this is the 10-step process of the book, right there. And if you look in the table of contents of the book, you'll see that the chapters align to those 10 steps. Okay? So I've just given you a quick overview to the book. Now, let me just say a few more words about the first few steps. First of all, why start with the customer need? Why not start with, say, your advantages or your resources? Well, I like to say that I started my first company with a really cool technology for which there was no market need. And it took me 6 to 9 months to let go of that idea. I won't bore you with what it was. It was conditional voting, a patent I got in '92, and swap it for something for which there was a real customer need, namely the ability to do surveys on the internet. And that Windows product we came out with in 1995, and that became a hit. Incidentally, that company, Decisive Technology, is part of Google today. So it really does work. Start with the customer need. That way you know that your company really will address a customer need, rather than with the technology, which was where so many of us tend to start. So sometimes I hear it said that all the opportunities out there have already been satisfied, all the customer needs. How many people buy that? How many people buy that all the customer needs out there have already been satisfied? Well, I agree with your assessment. I don't buy that either. Every time a new product or service comes to market, it creates new opportunities. Yes, it satisfies needs, or else it wouldn't sell, but it also creates needs in 3 ways. One, the product itself can be improved. It can be made faster, cleaner, tastier, whatever. The companies providing those solutions can be improved or have needs for sales, marketing, analytics, supply chain management, you name it. And three, very often new products and services create needs around them. For example, electric vehicles create the need for charging stations. New mobile devices create the need for mobile cases. So there have never been as many opportunities out there to address and potentially consolidate as there are today. So I think it is a great time to start a new business. Okay, here's one technique for finding a potentially infinite number of unsatisfied customer needs. Think of any product or service you use in an area that you're passionate about. Do we have any fellow runners in this group like me? Okay, great, thank you, sir. Well, one of the products we runners use, of course, are running shoes, right? So think of any product or service that you use in an area that you're passionate about. Let's take running shoes. Then ask yourself, what are limitations of that product or service? Well, I can think of three limitations of my running shoes. Number one, they start to smell when I wear them too many times. Two, if I want to change the color of the shoelaces to match the outfit I'm wearing, it's a hassle to thread and rethread the shoelaces each time. And three, they don't tell me how far I've run or how fast I've run, and they should know that, shouldn't they? So, three possible unsatisfied customer needs. I have to test them to see if they're real unsatisfied. As you know, that means talking to people, going online, going to shoe stores, seeing what's currently available, seeing if those products are really satisfying the need and so forth. And I'll find that some of those needs already have at least partial solutions. For example, there are foot pads and sprays that'll deal with smelly shoes. And then I asked the next question was, what are the limitations of those solutions, the foot sprays and the foot pads? Well, they have to be changed every day or done every day. What if I could go a whole week or a month without doing it? Now, is there any product that serves that? And similarly with the other paths. So I start with a single product or service in an area that I'm passionate about, ask what are its limitations, and then the limitations of the products that satisfy those limitations, and the limitations of those products and so forth. And this way I can come up with a potentially infinite number of unsatisfied customer needs. That single product blossoms into an entire tree of potentially unsatisfied customer needs. So that's one technique for finding unsatisfied customer needs. Okay, let me turn to the other puzzle piece, which are advantages. And to talk about that, I'd like to take you back 400 years ago to what is now Hyderabad, India. 400 years ago, and this story is apocryphal, and by that I mean it's very likely to be true, even though we don't have any definite proof that it's true. 400 years ago, a wealthy farmer near Hyderabad was approached by an ancient Buddhist priest who told him that if he could find diamonds, he could become the wealthiest man in the world. Well, despite the success of his farm and the considerable wealth he already enjoyed, the farmer became very excited about this idea and decided to go for it. And assembled a team, bought diamond equipment, sold his farm, and spent the next 20 years traversing the vast Asian, North African, and European continents in search of diamonds. He found none. At the end of 20 years, he stood on a steep cliff overlooking the Mediterranean, starving, afflicted, penniless. As he stood there, a great wave came up, and in his utter desperation, he threw himself into that great wave, disappeared beneath its foaming crest, and was never seen again. Meanwhile, the guy who bought his farm was tilling the fields. There was a stream that ran through the fields, and he noticed a funny black stone in the stream. He reached in, took it out, and it looked like it had an eye that reflected the colors of the rainbow. He thought that was unusual, so he put it in his pocket, brought it back to the farmhouse, put it on a table, and forgot about it. Sometime later, that same ancient Buddhist priest who told the first farmer about diamonds stopped by for a visit. And when he saw that stone, he became very excited to recognize a diamond in its original unprocessed state. And he asked the farmer if there were any other stones like that out there, and the farmer didn't know. So together the two men ran out, and they found acres and acres of diamonds, tens of thousands of diamonds. That farm would become Golconda, near what is today Hyderabad, India, the most prolific diamond mine in history, from which the crown jewels of England, Germany, and many other heads of state were mined. If the first farmer had only recognized all the resources he had, he would have become the wealthiest man in the world. Similarly, each and every one of us has acres of diamonds. And right now, we are going to inventory and catalog them. I use the acronym STARS with 2 A's and 2 R's to remember them all. Your skills, the technologies you know about, your assets, your achievements, your reputation, your relationships, and your strengths, as in inner strengths. And no matter where you are in life, no matter whether you've started a company or thinking of starting one or aren't sure if you want to start one, one exercise that's very worthwhile is take out a big sheet of paper, make 7 columns on it, 1 for each of those words, put 1 word at the top of each column, and write down as many of your resources that you can think of. Here's an example. So our skills and technologies can include those that we have learned both by formal training and that we've picked up because we're passionate about those ideas. The assets can be physical, financial, or knowledge-based. Accomplishments and are there to build your self-confidence. Relationships include both personal and professional relationships, reputation, how people know you, and strengths. These are inner strengths like courage, good judgment, passion, integrity, perseverance, honesty, and so forth. Write down as many as you can think of, even if they don't think they're going to be relevant, even if you don't think they're going to be relevant. We use this chart again and again throughout the 10-step process to evaluate different customer needs that we've come up with to see where the fit is the best between the customer needs we've come up with and your resources. Now, the different resources play different roles. The skills and technologies, knowledge-based assets, and also relationships tend to be the ones most relevant for differentiating between different customer needs to assess the fit. The financial and physical assets tend to be more broadly applicable to any customer need. If you have $10,000 or 10,000 pounds, you could invest that money in any business. But if you have some unusual resources or skills or knowledge, those will be specific to some customer needs and not others. And finally, these are mainly here to build your self-confidence. It is hard to start your own business and to stick with it. And so building your confidence is something we do very deliberately, especially this last column, your inner strengths. And I devote an entire chapter to that right after I lay out the STARS model which is called Growing Your Mind from the Inside Out. And I'd like to say a bit about that right now. So I've had the privilege in writing the book over the last 5 years, from 2011 to 2015, of working with lots of MIT professors. I just finished a term as president of the Worldwide MIT Alumni Association, and over the years I've gotten to work closely with lots of our faculty. One of them is, I'm drawing a blank on Anne's last name. Anyway, one of the things she says is the only way to start a new habit, the only way to break an old habit is to start a new habit. She views the brain as like an iceberg, the mind. We're only consciously aware of about 10% of the messages that come into our mind. The remaining 90% of the signals and messages that we get, we're not even consciously aware of. But yet they register with our unconscious mind, and some of them are dangerous, harmful. Negative things that we repeat about ourselves again and again, the unconscious mind will accept as fact, and it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So one of the principles in this chapter is never say anything negative about yourself. To be very clear, I'm not worried about what other people think about us. I'm worried about what our most important audience thinks about us, namely our unconscious minds. So whenever one of these negative thoughts might creep into your mind, think of a specific, whatever it is, think of a specific time, no matter how small, where you did the opposite. If it was a sport, you were the star. If it was a team, you brought everyone together. If it was directions, you got us there without looking at the map. If it was a social situation, you put everyone at ease. No matter how small, write down every detail of that. And Professor Anne Graybiel is the name I was trying to think of before in Brain and Cognitive Science at MIT. Let that positive thought and image squeeze the negative thought out of your mind, and let that become your new reality. So that's one of the principles in this chapter. Here's another one. When I was in my mid-30s, I accepted the fact that I'm gay. Most people would not view that as an asset from a business standpoint. I disagree. For me, it has been an asset in 5 different ways. Number one, when you're growing up gay, you know absolutely, with absolute certainty, that some of the world's routine assumptions are wrong. People routinely assume that guys are attracted to gals and vice versa, don't they? You know that it's not universally correct. And so growing up gay has helped me not necessarily accept the status quo, think outside the box, and that's made me a better entrepreneur and manager. 2, it wasn't socially acceptable to be openly gay when I was growing up, so at least some of the energy I might have put into dating, I put into sports and studying and career instead. Today, 30 years later, I am hugely enjoying the benefit of that early investment. Maybe I wouldn't have gone to MIT if I hadn't been gay. 3, I'm not a minority in any sense that I can think of other than being gay, and so it has helped sensitize me to what it's like to be a minority. 4, when people see I'm not trying to hide my sexual orientation, it helps build trust between us because they can see I'm being honest with them. And 5, I think it further conveys that I have strength in reserve if I can be open about the fact that I'm gay. Similarly, if there is some aspect of yourself that you genuinely cannot change, find a way to view it as a strength. Set the bar very high. Don't use this as an excuse to accept some aspect of yourself that you can change and would like to change. But if you genuinely cannot change it, if you can find a way to view it as an asset, it'll be hugely empowering for you as it was for me, and that aspect of yourself will become one of your strengths. A few years ago, I was giving this very same talk to a group of undergraduates in Guatemala. And about halfway back in the auditorium, a young man was sitting, and as I spoke, he slowly raised his fist to his chest like this and gently pressed it against his chest like this. And at first, I thought it was some small gesture of agreement or support for what I was saying. But then, when I looked again, I saw he wasn't making a fist at all. His hand had no fingers on it. And I imagine he was saying, "This I cannot change. This is my strength." So again, if there is some aspect of yourself that you genuinely cannot change, find a way to view it as a strength, and it will become one of your strengths. How many people here use PowerPoint? Okay, great. Well, here's a PowerPoint tip. Add a kitten, cat, or puppy to the slide. That'll make it more engaging. But this is not about the cat. You see that point on the carpet up there. Well, I can't lift up that point on the carpet very high, can I? Unless I also lift up all the points around it. Well, we're all like the points on that carpet. And just as we saw that it's to the benefit of us to look for and find the good in ourselves, so is it to do that in other people. That attracts good people to us because people want to be around people who see and build on the good in them. And incidentally, that elevates us to a position of leadership among those people. So the same principle there that we talked about before applies to others. So those are some of the techniques in growing your mind from the inside out. Some people have the idea that innovators are born, not made. And that if you're not born an innovator, you're not going to be an innovator. Well, I don't buy that at all. I believe any one of us can be an innovator. And in the book on innovation, in the chapter on innovation, I talk about some techniques for how each and every one of us can innovate. One technique is simply taking the things that we already know and combining them in novel ways. And again, the STARS chart provides a convenient tool for doing that. So I can see here, this person, for example, has a chemistry background and medical experience and knows some Spanish. That suggests this customer need, translation between patient and doctor tool, or this service, same-day home prescription of delivery of prescription drugs. So one of the techniques in the book is to make a list of all your skills and technologies. You can actually do it for any of your resources, but those are the ones I believe are most productive. And then very deliberately list all the pairs of those combinations. If you know n things, if the total number of your skills and technologies is n, there will be n times n minus 1 over 2 pairs of combinations. So if, for example, you know 10 things, there will be 45 unique pairs. Make a list of all 45 things and try to look for and find a customer need that combination might satisfy. You know all the things on that list, or else they wouldn't be on your chart, so you might be in a unique position to satisfy that customer need. By the mid-2000s, our code base at Customer Sat had become full of performance bottlenecks, security holes, and bugs. The result of too many quick fixes by too junior engineers. I lost a VP of engineering because the problems with our code base just seemed insurmountable. And so I had to hire a new one, so I did a search and hired Dickie Singh, a Sikh with his characteristic turban. There's a picture of him there. He quickly came in, comprehended our code base in its entirety, found the performance bottlenecks, the security holes, and the bugs, and found either ways to fix them or to bypass the code so that we didn't have to touch the legacy code base to fix it. As you know, with a legacy code base, just touching the code may create new bugs if you try to fix old bugs. So Dickie added a tremendous amount of value very quickly. He quickly took on responsibility for software development, web operations, QA, tech support, and IT, freeing me up to focus on the things that I do best: sales, marketing, products, and dealing with customers. Less than 3 years later, after Dickie joined us, the company was acquired in a transaction to which he had added a great deal of value. So what to look for in a co-founder? So you can find a Dickie Singh. Incidentally, one more thought about Dickie. I can well imagine that other hiring managers saw the turban and thought, I'm not sure he would fit our company culture. If so, it was their great loss and our great gain. And I've often wondered why it was that our little company was able to hire a engineering executive of his ability and stature despite our small size. And if you ask Dickie whether he's ever been discriminated against, he would strongly deny it. And that's one of the qualities in him that I admire, his refusal to be a victim. But I'm not so sure, and I think maybe he has been. In any event, if you don't discriminate, then you have a wider choice of good people, and good people come to you. So what to look for in a co-founder? I talk about 3 C's in the book: character, complementarity, and the ability to co-create a vision with you. So character is independent of you and your startup, and that's whatever combination of lots of different qualities, like the ones that we talked about in the right-hand-most column, whichever ones are most important to you. Complementarity is relative to you, and that's how complementary their skills are to yours and knowledge. And also trust is part of that. And finally, the ability to co-create a vision. If they're coming on as a co-founder, fully recognize that they need to contribute something essential to the vision and mission of the company so that your co-founder is as fully engaged with your vision and mission as you are. So I've often said there's no one in the world I would rather start another company with than Dickie Singh. And indeed, since we sold Customer Sat in 2008, he and I have started what is for me my third company, Pies, which is a mobile intelligence platform. And incidentally, if anyone here is developing a mobile app, check out pies.com, P-Y-Z-E, because it's an applet you can install free of charge with your, at least the basic version is free, that gives you a ton of customer intelligence. Yes?
That's independent of your mission.
It's kind of like the absolute value of the person. Your mission may change, your vision for the company may change, but the person's character will not change if they have character. So that's what I mean by regardless of which direction you take, that person will still have value. Whereas if you go in a different direction, let's say the person has hardware skills and you're a software person, but you get out of the hardware business, then you lose that aspect, but you still retain the character. I do say that the value of a co-founder overall is the product of all three factors, A times B times C. So if any one of them is absent, it's like it's not a good fit. Okay, and here's another point, and one of the reasons that having a co-founder can be so helpful is there are many more ways that you can combine your skills and technologies. So a lot more ways that you can innovate. So if I know 4 things and my co-founder knows 6, together we have 10, and the number of combinations of 10 things is a lot more than the combination of 6 things and 4 things. Okay, now we've talked about advantages, and of course your advantages are relative to others who are satisfying the same customer need. Those are your competitors. And some of those are going to be much larger companies and better established companies than you, right? So how can you compete with much larger, better established companies? Well, for that, let me turn to the laptop market. So IBM, Dell, and HP all run Windows. And each of their products is better than the other in some fashion. One might have a 20% larger screen. One might have 30% more memory. Another one might have a longer battery life and so forth. Well, in contrast, or maybe it's faster or cheaper or stronger, it's better in some fashion. In contrast, Apple is different. They don't run Microsoft Windows. As you know, they developed the operating system and the hardware themselves. They made them easy to use. They optimized the two for each other. Initially, it was great for desktop publishing, and then later music and audio, and then video. These initially were niche applications, but they became mainstream applications over time. Gradually, over the years, Mac took market share away from Windows until in 2011. 2012, Apple became the most valuable company in the world. So different means finding dimensions to compete along that your competitors, your established competitors, don't compete along. That gives you time and space to get established with a customer base who, if you're the best solution for that base, no matter how small, they'll buy from you again and again. They'll tell friends and colleagues about you, and you will grow with them and the friends and colleagues. So different is better than better. Here's a way to think of it. Here are HP, IBM, and Dell, all better than each other in some fashion, but here on a different axis is Apple. You want to find that axis. Here's another way to look at it. On this chart, Apple is roughly at parity, perhaps with the Windows laptops and screen size, speed, and storage, but there are these other 3 axes where they are unambiguously the best. And that's what fueled Apple's growth for so many years. Similarly, you want to find dimensions of customer need where you don't have competitors, and this is a way of avoiding competitors. And that chapter is called Avoiding Competitors. When should you raise money? 98% of the companies I see raise money before they're ready. And as a result, they waste a lot of time on deals that don't close. They make a negative first impression on investors. And they're wasting time that could and should better be spent by just growing their company and getting it further along. In contrast, if you wait until the company is ready to raise money, then the deal comes together quickly, you make a positive first impression with investors, and you can get back quicker to doing what both you and your investors want you to do, which is growing your company. So what are these best times for a company to raise money? Well, I'm going to suggest there are two groups of such times. Right after you have significantly reduced risk from the investor standpoint, or right after, before and after, you have significantly increased upside potential for your investors. To be very clear, it's not when you've run out of money, because then you have no negotiating leverage at all, no credibility at all, and not even when you're about to run out of money. But let's look at these two categories that I've just described. So when you reduce investor risk, so if each of these levels is a stage or milestone in your company's history. If you have positive cash flow, you've eliminated the risk that you can generate revenue. If you have revenue, you've eliminated the risk that you can get customers. If you have customers, you've eliminated the risk that your prototype work and so forth. So the further that you can get down that path, the more risk you've eliminated. Conversely, or maybe I should say similarly, if you can show that make a case that you've increased upside potential. Now, I use a bowling pin model in the book to do that. Think of each of these market opportunities as a bowling pin. Here I show cities, but they could be vertical markets rather than cities, or they could be any other way of segmenting the opportunity. And you want to think through what is the best order to knock those bowling pins down, so that if you knock down the first one, it makes it easiest to knock down the next ones and next ones and so forth. And generally the later ones can be bigger than the earlier ones, because you've got the benefit of the brand awareness and knowledge of and experience that you've gained in the earlier ones. So in either case, and ideally both, if you know that you're about to reach one of those milestones on the previous slide, or if you're starting to demonstrate that, say, thanks to your penetration of Seville, you have your first few customers in Valencia, which makes it more compelling that yes, by knocking down the Seville bowling pin, you will indeed be able to knock down the subsequent bowling pins. Right before you reach a milestone like that is a good time to go to an investor, lay out everything we've talked about, your customer need, your advantage, your team, your success to date, and then let them know that you're going to reach a milestone in the next, say, 60 to 90 days. Maybe that milestone is your first 100,000 downloads, or your first profitable quarter, or your first deal with a major customer, whatever it might be. Then do what you said you're going to do and go back to that investor after you've done it. That starts building your credibility with that investor even before they become an investor. And they may or may not invest, but they'll remember those were the guys who said you were going to do X, and they did X. And so maybe they'll come in on a subsequent round or say good things about you. So that's one set of ideas for when the best time to raise money is. Incidentally, it also begs the question, how do I fund my company in the interim until I reach that stage where I can go to investors? And there I suggest three ways in the book. One is by living frugally yourself. And I offer the example of my friend Nick Winters in San Francisco, who has reduced his life to exactly 99 physical things. One laptop, one cell phone, 2 pairs of jeans, 1 wedding ring, and so forth. And of course, that's a very extreme case of minimalist living, but it does show how little we really need to live. And he's able to use all of the mind share and dollars that he might otherwise spend on other things and invest those in his business. That chapter is called The Freedom of Frugality in the book. So one way is by living frugally yourself. Two is by delivering services. And in fact, the way that we funded my second company was using the tools of my first company. My first company made software, Windows software back in those days, for doing surveys via email and later the web. My second company started out using that tool to do surveys for large corporations. Back in the late 90s, it was still a novel set of skills to be able to do a survey on the internet. And so we had all those skills from my first company. So that's a second one. And then third is friends and family. And if your friends and family see that you're living frugally and providing services and really doing this in earnest, then they'll be receptive to considering lending you money or investing in your business, or more receptive. So those are a few thoughts about when to raise money. Scalability. What do I mean by scalability? I mean increasing revenue or profit of your business for each additional dollar of capital invested. So in this example, the green company is much more scalable than the red company. Any company can be made more scalable. Here are 4 techniques that we talk about in the book for increasing your scalability. One is making it less labor intensive. That could mean automating processes or having your customers do it rather than staff do it. So if your customers can configure your product online rather than have to have salespeople do it, that's a more scalable approach. More automated, and the red company is probably more labor intensive than the green company. More network effects, and there's a whole chapter on business models that attract where different types of customers or the same type of customer attract each other, either one-sided or two-sided or multi-sided network effects. And finally, more intelligence in the product. The more intelligence you can factor in, that doesn't cost anything in terms of cost of goods. It may require some additional development or licensing or something, but it's a fixed cost generally to incorporate intelligence into your product or service, which means you have a higher value product or service that you can either sell to a bigger audience or at a higher cost, higher price. So those are some ideas on scalability. Let me conclude by talking about ethics. What does ethical mean? Well, usually when we use the word, it means something like considerate and honest and caring, these kinds of things. And I don't dispute those definitions. I like those definitions. I aspire to those meanings of the word ethical. And if I had to say whether entrepreneurs as a whole were more or less ethical in those senses of the word than people in other fields, I wouldn't say that they're more or less. I'd say they're about the same as people in other fields. However, I do think there's another meaning of the word ethical in which entrepreneurs are a particularly ethical group of people. And let me share with you this alternative definition of the word ethical, that which shifts a zero-sum or negative-sum situation to positive-sum. So you know what a zero-sum situation is. If I steal a pound of meat from you, I have a pound of meat and you don't. That's no better than zero-sum. And if we get in a fight about it, that's going to be negative-sum. On the other hand, if you have a pound of meat for sale at a certain price and I buy it from you, then I'm better off because I wouldn't have entered into the transaction if I didn't think it was a good deal for me. And you wouldn't be selling it unless you thought it was a good deal for you. So that's a win-win. It may be a very small win-win, but when you aggregate all those win-wins over the billions of transactions that have taken place among people on Earth over the decades and centuries, it adds up to a huge increase in quality of life and standards of living for all of us. So entrepreneurs are uniquely ethical according to this definition, in my view, because they find new solutions to customer needs that did not exist before. The solutions did not exist before. And so that creates an opportunity for win-wins where they did not previously exist. And so given that, I think entrepreneurship is one of the most ethical career choices you can make, because you're finding new solutions to customer needs and making the world better that way. The late great founder of Apple, Steve Jobs, was often criticized for not being very philanthropic. And indeed, in his life, he wasn't very philanthropic. But I don't agree that that means he wasn't a highly ethical person and leader. Look at all the good he did in the world. He made computing readily accessible to all of us through the Mac, starting back in the 1980s. Before that, it was a high priesthood that had to use things like MS-DOS. If anyone is as old as I am here and can remember MS-DOS. He has brought entertainment to people through products like the iPod. He's enabled people to stay in touch with their families through FaceTime and the iPhone. He's brought computing into education. He's provided employment for 100,000 people at Apple, plus potentially millions of others who are part of the larger supply chain of Apple and who are developing apps for Apple products. He has done a huge amount of good in the world, in my view. So he qualifies squarely for this definition of ethical in my mind. Well, we've talked about starting with a customer need and recognizing all the advantages that you have, seeing how there are tons of needs out there, how you have many more advantages than you realize, what to look for in a co-founder, when to raise money. There's much more in the book. I'm sorry I don't have time to cover all of it today. But the beautiful thing about entrepreneurship is you don't need permission. You don't need credentials, despite the fact that all of you here at Cambridge have impressive credentials. You just need to go out and do it. So let's go out there and have fun doing it. Thank you very much.